Welcome everyone to the UIBuzz.com podcast. I'm your host Peter Whittam. On this podcast, we talk about topics like user interaction, user design, interface design, application development. It might be tools, techniques, or trends, anything along those lines. So why don't we go ahead and let's get into it. I recently wanted to go back and revisit a side project that I have that I've never been truly satisfied with the solution that I built, that I'm using for it and partly built, I guess I should say, and maybe that's part of the problem right there. So I wanted to just strip out and, go back to the basics and cancel the whole thing and start over. Now, anytime I start a personal project, I always feel it's an opportunity to try some new tools, right? Not that there's anything wrong with the tools that I've been using, but I always see it as an opportunity to learn something new and try something different. So this time around, I wanted to, it's kind of a blog, I guess you would call it, more than anything, for my website that has my photography stuff on it, which is Graphics Media, graphicsmedia.com. Now, at the moment, it's hosted on SmugMug, and I'm not really going to talk about that too much. I did that for a reason, and there's lots of useful stuff in there, but it doesn't serve the purpose that I need for my project now. So given that, as I've mentioned before, I use Gatsby.js for my other sites, I thought let's follow a similar trend because I'm just blown away again by how much sort of jamstack stuff is working out really well for me. But I thought, let's not use Gatsby.js, right? I've already done that and I'm super happy with it, very impressed, and I don't want to give any impression that I have any reason to move away from it. That's not the goal here. That's not what I'm saying. But I thought to myself, let's try another one. So I decided, I've never used it. Let's try NextJS, which may be familiar to some of you out there. It's very popular, and I thought, let's go ahead and give it a go. So, in true fashion, of course, anytime I don't know anything about something or I'm starting a new set of tools, I approach it from the fact of not knowing anything so that I don't have any preconceived notions of what I expect from it. So I followed through some basic tutorials from the very beginning on the NextJS site, and I'll put a link for that in the show notes. But what I want to say is I was super impressed with how easy it was. Now, of course, I had some understanding because I've worked with Gatsby before, and both Gatsby and NextJS sit on top of React, so there's that familiar ground there. But I was really impressed with how easy it was to get started. Right now, there's going to be a little bit of a comparison here between Next.js and Gatsby. That's inevitable. But I really want to try and sort of keep it down to my experiences and not do so much of a comparison. So I followed the tutorials, which actually help you make a very basic blog, which was just a perfect starting point for me. And the first impression I had was, firstly, compared to some of the other tools I've used, when you spin up like the development server that you run locally in that, it was a lot quicker to parse all the files and get it up and running. So that's good from a development standpoint. It has a lot of the features, of course, that you see, from a lot of the other tool sets. Things like live reloading. So as I'm editing the code, I can see it appearing live in the window on the actual web page. That's fantastic. Now, what I did, as I was working through the tutorial, there was parts like, applying CSS, some basic styling to get you familiar with those concepts. I bypassed those a little bit because I also wanted to try another technology that, again, I'll put a link in the show notes, that I hear a lot of people talking about. And I wanted to try Tailwind CSS and see what, all the fun was there that everyone was having. So I immediately sort of stopped at that point when I had to do some styling and jumped over to Tailwind and incorporated that into my project. And again, amazed how easy it was to do that. And Tailwind looks to be very powerful. So that's something else you may want to look at. Now, Tailwind works with a whole bunch of different things. It's basically a CSS framework. I may be describing it wrong there, and you may shoot me down for that, but you can use it with anything. And it's got a whole bunch of pre-built styles, and I know they've got some paid components, but I was just wanting to try the styles first of all. So that gave me a basic styling, and I could really just forget the styles, designing the site from a style point and just get back to learning Next.js. So then after that, what I did was I wanted to learn the basics, obviously, of routing, right? How do I create pages? Well, unlike Gatsby, for example, and I'm sure many others, I didn't have to do any configuration, right? I just made a folder. I'm looking at the code here. I just made a folder called Pages, and in there I put the pages that I needed. And NextJS just magically looked at it and said, okay, great, I've got some pages. So for example, I'm, on my index page, of course, there's some basic things you do, right? You're going to do some basic imports. But once I set it up as a very basic, essentially React component and exported it, it just magically starts working as a page. So I was really impressed with that. The routing is very easy to get along with. The routing out of the box does follow the format in which you lay out the files and folders. So that's worth noting, especially when it comes to things like posts. Now on that, I created another folder at the root level of the project called posts. And anything I put in there is a markdown file. It brings that in. But the default URL in production, if this makes sense, and if you follow me here, because it's in the posts folder with a file name, the URL structure will be, domain name /posts/ whatever the name of your markdown file is. Now, of course, you can do some things to change that, but again, we're starting from the very basics of let's just get this thing running, understand the basics, and then maybe I'll put a slug in the markdown files later on. But for most people out of the box, that's going to do it for you, right? That's a very simple, almost, just managing your URLs at the file structure level in the project, which works out well for a lot of people. May not be the most SEO friendly, but it works. So anyway, back to the Next.js part. I don't have any config files, which was interesting to me, right? Now, I have added a couple since then because obviously I incorporated Tailwind. So I added a Tailwind configuration file and I've added a post CSS configuration file. But the important point is there's no, node configuration file, browser configuration file, anything like that. Now, there may be later on, obviously, when things get more complex, I may have to do that. But my point is, starting out from nothing out of the box, it's very easy to understand because I don't have all these extra files that I'm looking at and saying, well, what's this file? What do I do here? Do I have to configure this? No, Next.js just does it for you, which, is very refreshing compared to some of the other frameworks, if you like, that I've used, or whatever you want to call them, site builders. So far, I've been very impressed with Next.js, and this is definitely the one I'm going to use for this project and push it further. Now, I mentioned that the posts are markdown files. That was my choice, right? You don't have to do it that way, but that was my choice because that's how I do my sites. However, and then probably coming up soon, I'll have to do another episode where I talk about contentful, because I have been taking part in the 100 Days of Gatsby coding project, and the way that works is you have these sprints that they've created, and they actually want you to use contentful, which is an online I don't really want to use the word database, but I guess that's the way it will be familiar to most, right? And I'm super impressed with Contentful as well. So I definitely want to talk about that as I become more experienced with that. But anyway, on this one, I've chosen markdown files because it's just familiar territory for me, right? You've got that header area where you put all the metadata in, like the title, the date, featured image, summary. That's what I've got in mind right now, and it's super easy to work with. Now, talking about that, let's go into that a little bit here, right? So when I'm rendering out my posts, I'm not using, GraphQL is what I use for, or graphical, I'm not sure the best way to pronounce that. But I use that with my Gatsby sites, and it's doing something similar, right? But it sort of isn't with Next.js. What it's doing is, I return the props and then I pass those into, the builders for the pages. But it's not quite the same. But it does, out of the box, it just gives me instant access to that metadata, that header data in the markdown files, which is what I need. And the whole goal of my project here and trying Next.js was, I want to get this up to speed quickly because, this project is all about the content. It's not about how much of an amazing site can I make. It's how quickly can I make a site that I understand and can control and lay out and do everything I want feature-wise. But more importantly, how quickly can I get it live and how quickly can I get the content in there and then worry about building on it later. So, to wrap this episode up, I'm just really impressed with NextJS, and I'm not moving away from Gatsby. Like I said, I actually feel like I benefit from using both because it gives me experience on both of those platforms, and they are both built on top of React. So I'm learning knowledge that I can really use with both, and I think that if you can find technologies like that, that's a good way to go for your own skill set and getting things done, right? You don't have to jump between essentially foreign programming languages or frameworks and have to switch your head between each one. And the learning curve is longer and the time to live is longer. If you can find stuff built along similar lines, that's always going to be a benefit. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. You can reach out to me at uibuzz.com. You can leave, comments on this podcast. I'll leave a link where you can go across and leave comments on there. If it's been helpful, please feel free to support me on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/PWCOM. Or if you want, you can just buy me a coffee. I really love my coffee as a developer, as you can well imagine. You can go to buymeacoffee.com/PWCOM. Or if you want, you can reach out to me on Twitter at UIBuzz. And with that, take care, and we will speak next time.